All right, welcome. And my name is John Mark Walker. I'm with Red Hat, and we're talking about cloud herding, cloud management, the exciting world of cloud management. How do you manage all the things in the cloud? How do you control things in the cloud? And I'll tell you how we're doing it with ManageIQ and the parts that we consider important and why you should be doing it. How many of you have heard of ManageIQ before? Okay. How many of you have to manage? How many of you have to work with multiple virtualization platforms like VMware, Amazon? Yeah, okay. We all have to manage multiple things, right? So this presents a way how you can have a manager of managers sitting between you and all the various platforms you have running on the back end. How do you orchestrate services towards all of them? How do you orchestrate workloads? How do you implement policies across all of the virtualization and cloud platforms? It's a very useful tool, especially if you are in a heterogeneous environment, as pretty much everyone is. So, without further ado, who needs management? Management is a terrible word. Nobody likes it because it's loaded. It has bad connotations, either through the enterprise software world, where the connotation is it's a crappy piece of bloatware that does a whole lot of things that you really never wanted, but your manager bought it, paid millions of dollars for it, so there it is, and now you have to use it. It also has the bad connotation of management in the sense of your manager. No one likes to use the word management. No one likes to be management. No one likes to report to management. No one likes to buy management software. But having said that, there has to be a way to control all the things. And there's always this kind of balance you have to strike between controlling everything and allowing those who are doing the work to innovate in ways that are useful and move things forward. So there's always this kind of tenuous balance between control and innovation or agility. But that's kind of the balance we try to strike with ManageIQ. We try to create something that's responsive to the needs of the user in the data center and the developer in the data center. Anyone who has to create multi-cloud applications and services, this will hopefully be useful to you. So why do we have an open source management technology platform? Why do we need one? When you look at the life cycle of innovation, the life cycle of technology, it follows a predictable pattern for the most part. Most of the time you get a new technology, it enters into the world, and it usually arrives via skunkwork projects under the radar, not really recognized officially, but unofficially it's used in spots here and there to do useful things. Linux arrived back in the day because it was useful to help people get things done, but it wasn't purchased. It wasn't, the CIO didn't know about it. A lot of companies were using Linux and really had no idea. And most open source projects follow that same pattern. And you can see that same pattern repeat itself for multiple things, whether it's Linux or it's virtualized environments. Virtualization used to be just a plaything for developers. It wasn't a serious thing because it was so inefficient. Remember those? But then over time, it actually became the core piece of pretty much everyone's data center infrastructure. Now we see the same thing happen with Docker and containers. These things that happen with enter into the data center with these skunkworks projects, and then before you know it, they proliferated beyond anyone's control, and before you know it, they hit the CIO's radar, and he's like, oh my God, what do we do with this stuff? So you follow this predictable pattern of adoption, proliferation, and at some point it has to be brought under control. How do we officially recognize this new thing? How do we integrate it into our workflows, into our systems? How do we make sure that we're using it, not abusing it? And then how do we, basically how do we bring it inside whatever management framework that we've decided on, as a company? The thing is, open source software has infiltrated data centers at such a rate and has proliferated at such a rate that the rate of change in a data center is increasing over time significantly, to the point where the management tools themselves needed to keep control of all the new open source tools and components being introduced. The management technology itself needs to be open source just to keep up with the pace of change in the modern data center. And so when you look at this technology life cycle or innovation life cycle diagram, it's not just the initial infrastructure piece of technology that follows this cycle. It's also, we're now seeing the same cycle repeat itself with the management software itself. Thus the need for things like OpenStack, CloudStack, other types of management tooling. And now, with going even more meta, the manager of managers, say with ManageIQ, following the same path, introduction into the data center because somebody needs a thing that they can get quickly to help them to allocate a new service catalog that they can present to users and developers to allocate workloads across multiple cloud platforms that they have to deal with yesterday, but they don't have time to wait for an allocation of budget to purchase this thing. It's going to take 2 months to deliver. So management solutions following the same path as all the other open source solutions before them. And ManageIQ is just the latest in the series. What is the fundamental shift that has allowed the proliferation of open software? I'm not going to spend much time on this because I just spent a whole talk on this subject a couple hours ago, so you should have been there. But essentially, it's the customer is now on an equal footing with the vendor, so it's end users, it's developers participating on the same level, and it's creating this remarkable change, remarkable rate of change within the data center. And it's all due to, it's no longer just a one-way street. It's everyone participating in the same level. Getting back to the specific subject at hand, when you look at the world of hybrid cloud computing, what is hybrid cloud? We define it as any time you have to deal with multiple, whether virtualization platforms or cloud platforms, that constitutes a hybrid cloud in our world. When you ask a simple question, do you need this? Do you have an interest in it? The vast majority of people answer yes, because we do not live in a world where everyone lives on the same technology path. We all have heterogeneous tools that we have to deal with, whether we like it or not. No one's going to have all Amazon. No one's going to have all OpenStack. No one is going to have all VMware anymore. It's going to be a mixed environment. And the key to success going forward is how do you deal with that mixed environment, and how do you create tools and toolkits that take advantage of the mixed environment that you have. We'll talk about silos in a minute, but essentially, hybrid cloud computing means avoiding the silos. When you dive a little bit further and you ask about the different challenges you have with your private cloud infrastructure, but with private cloud, we're really talking about virtualization. You'll see a variety of categories here, some of which are technology specific, and some of which are more kind of cultural. Now, luckily, when it comes to technology, like say, management and operational processes, there can be a technology solution for this. Something like ManageIQ can actually aid a department in corralling these sorts of issues. Unfortunately, there's no technology that can help with your culture. You're kind of on your own with that. But you'll notice like security, you'll see like the areas of concern here: security, management, operational processes, funding, chargeback model. How do you keep track of how much you're using? How much do you keep track of how much each individual is responsible for paying, each individual department? It's a lot of stuff to keep records of, keep accounting of, and it's good to have that single dashboard, that single pane of glass that lets you track it in a useful way. Also, there is no technology solution for politics, just so everyone knows. So when you say, I want to build a cloud, it's such a simple statement, right? I want to build a cloud. Okay, that's great, but what does that mean? There's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes when you say, I want to build a cloud. There's the self-servicing part. There's the, are you mean provisioning? Do you mean management? Do you need a broker between multiple cloud platforms? Do you have something that lets you track your funding model? How are you setting quotas for individual users? There's a lot that goes into that statement. And if you're talking about hybrid clouds, multiple platforms to deal with on the back end, then that just raises the amount of complexity much higher. And so let's look at where we stand today for the most part. For the most part, if you are the average admin in your typical company that has this mixed environment, chances are this is kind of your state today, where you are faced with each of these individual management platforms or interfaces on the back end that you have to have that you have to deal with on a one-by-one basis. You have to have applications that target the Amazon API or the OpenStack APIs or VMware or Rev or whatever platform you use on the back end, and you have to manage each of those separately. And it's kind of a pain, because it means that if you're deploying these scaled out services, you're kind of limited in how you do that. You can't just mix and match. You have to keep track of, okay, which application and service uses this set of APIs, which one uses this backend, and it can be very confusing and very easy to let it get out of hand and not have control over what's going on. This is the essential problem that we face, where we have each of these individual silos of cloud-based applications and no way to effectively deal with them. And so the idea is, with the manager of managers concept of ManageIQ, you now have a way of interfacing with each of these in some sort of coherent way and unsiloed. It's not, unfortunately, this is a simplistic view, because when you really dive in and look at what this means, you kind of get this view where you have, you start to get an idea of who are the people who can access, what level of access do they have, how do you approve things that are delegated to different people? Is there an approval workflow? How does it integrate with your management system? Can you intelligently place workloads based on different parameters that you set for each? How does it all work together in some way that is manageable? How do you enforce quotas? It's all part of the same whole. When you look at something like ManageIQ, we call it hybrid cloud management, but really, when you think about it, it's systems management for our age. It used to be systems management was some monitoring tools that you used to manage bare metal machines, but this is systems management today. Systems management is very much targeted at virtualization and cloud platforms, because for the most part, that is becoming the default that we have today. It's not so much bare metal as how do we allocate resources on these virtualized or cloud-based platforms. Any questions so far? If you're alive, raise your hand. Okay, all right. Some of you aren't alive. That's fine, but most of you are. That's good. And so looking at this sort of comprehensive systems management model, it's not just about how do I provision a VM on platform X, because that problem has been solved many times over and quite easily many years ago. It's not only how do I deploy a VM on platform X, what do I have running on that VM, how does it interact with the other applications and services running on different VMs, and how do you control them in a way that, in an intelligent way. It's the whole cycle, from provisioning and automation, monitoring, management, and eventually end of life. It's all part of the same cycle. This kind of gives you an overview of our view of IT as a service. When you look at the different pieces of, in the middle are all the components you could call ManageIQ. On the top are the different pieces that you need to integrate into your, the pieces that you need to actually utilize the compute resources on the back end. On the back end, you'll see like your cloud infrastructure, your virtualization infrastructure, and your maybe even bare metal. In the middle is, here are the tools that ManageIQ gives you to help you allocate each. It helps you match a provider down below to a service up top. So whether you're a developer and you're writing an application, you can utilize ManageIQ RESTful API on the back end to deploy applications and services however you want to place them based on policies that you set on the management engine down below. If you are in operations and you want to deploy specific versions of a piece of software, and you don't care where it goes. You just want to go at a place that, one, you know you have budget for, and two, you know it performs at a reasonable level. You can write that policy piece so that whatever the operations guy wants to do, it's more about conceptually what he wants to do as opposed to picking and choosing each component. He doesn't actually care where it goes. He just wants it to go to the right place depending on what parameters he set. Same thing with finance. You want an overall view, a comprehensive view of everything, of how much each component costs, and how you can charge back to each department that makes use of it. Now let's get into a bit more of the, that's kind of the conceptual view. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of what you can actually do with ManageIQ. How does it actually work in practice? What are some things you can do after you install? When you go to manageiq.org right now, you can download an image, and I'll warn you, they're about 1 gigabyte images, so it's not, you know, a small download. But after you download them, what do? Well, you can discover some of the providers that you can use as the basis for your compute infrastructure, whether it's Amazon EC2, VMware, OpenStack, or some other infrastructure as a service provider. No, we do not yet support Azure, but that is on the roadmap. You can add your host credentials so that you can log in as a user with some amount of permissions to do the jobs that you need to do. You can do things like fleecing, which is where once you've given your credentials, once you've absorbed one of the providers, you can actually do some smart discovery of what's on, say, a hypervisor, and it will basically run a job that will calculate everything that's running on all the VM guests on a given hypervisor, especially on VMware. That's probably the most featureful. And it will tell you the versions of applications running on those VMs, and allow you to set, which will allow you to populate a dashboard with all the information. And you can then set policies based on that information, which I'll get into later. You can also get a feel for what the total compute capacity is that you have and how much of that you're utilizing, so you can measure against quotas and how much, and also budget. Let's look at one of these. Let's say you want to discover resources on a new provider, and you're launching this provider. In this case, let's say you're looking at, I think you're looking at VMware here. But there is a method here with you on the embedded video, which is kind of hard to follow along with. But the idea is, you know, once you've given it your credentials, once you've pointed it in the right direction, you can just give it a couple of items in the drop downs in the forms here, and it will begin to populate data once it has the proper permissions to pull the data. It's one of the probably, I guess, one of the most immediate features that you'll see when you start to use ManageIQ, because it's the one that populates the database and the dashboard with all the useful information that you want to get, you know, out of your vSphere in this example. Let's say you want to do some fleecing for, in this case, Overt. I think there was a talk on Overt here earlier today. So imagine Overt is being managed in the context of all the other stuff that you have, whether it's, you know, VMware or AWS. In this case, there are some basic requirements that you have to fulfill so that you can manage, you can point your ManageIQ server to the right Overt installation. In this case, it requires setting up iSCSI and NFS, so you have that, you're able to mount the NFS database. Rick Mullen, my God. So, and then once you point at the right place, you set the server relationship between the ManageIQ server and the cluster that you're managing. From there, you can do the fleecing, and it pulls in the information from the VMs. A word of warning, the KVM-based fleecing is not as comprehensive as VMware fleecing, but it's still pretty good stuff. Let's say you want to understand how much capacity you're using or how much you have. how much are you utilizing. I mean, there's some things you can work through. By the way, all these videos are on YouTube. You can get to them if you go to manageiq.org/docs or documentation, and you can find kind of like the top 10 tasks to run after you deploy ManageIQ. And yeah. And then one of the cool parts about, one of the other cool parts about ManageIQ is the ability to, at any given time, you have these automate functions that you can perform on ManageIQ, and you can create these customized flowcharts depending on a given state. And it's a way to control resources anywhere in the environment that you're managing in an automated way. And you can create these custom dialogues based on this, so you can create like new little dialogues backed by scripts that you customize on the back end. And there are lots of other things you can try. I mean, this is just a very basic set of examples. You can create these custom dialogues for your automate components. You can play with the different orchestration integration. We have some orchestration integration with OpenStack Heat, also with Amazon's CloudFormation's orchestration engine. You can set system-wide policies, some of which based on different security variables that you set. So, for example, if you want to, after you've collected all information from fleecing, if you want to know if you're vulnerable to specific, issued vulnerability reports, you can run a report and then set policies to turn off the VMs that are vulnerable, so that you can manage your workloads to not go to the vulnerable VMs while you upgrade them, and hopefully, not have a denial of service error in the process. You can create custom service catalogs. There's a project right now called Project Jellyfish. If you go to projectjellyfish.org, this is created by Booz Allen Hamilton engineers. They utilize the ManageIQ RESTful API on the back end to create a service catalog with a shopping cart, so that they can allocate cloud services to individual users and admins, and when the users point and click their way through the service catalog, they can know how much it's costing their department and what kind of resources are available for them to do their jobs. Yeah. And here's kind of like the security example. There's a blog post here that we published about how to avoid things like shell shock. Some of the other vulnerabilities come out with Heartbleed with OpenSSL and a couple other things. You follow these basic instructions, and again, it's all about using the policy engine to both direct workloads away from the vulnerable resources, upgrading them, and then reinstating them so that the services will start to use them again. It's probably one of the key features that we try to really sell people on, the ability to do this kind of thing. Do you have your hand up? Yeah. We usually have to have a ManageIQ appliance running on the cluster that's where the hypervisor sits, or where the OpenStack servers are running. But you don't have an agent per se. We usually have it running on the hypervisor itself, and then that's how it's able to perform the VM fleecing. But you don't have to have anything running on the VMs. Sure. What's that? Right.
Everyone thinks it's the best thing to slice bread, and you're like, well, you still got to buy vCenter.
Well, you're right. So if you already have vCenter, sure. If you want to avoid VMware entirely, I'm okay with that. There are other virtualization platforms we can work with, so you don't have to have vCenter. So I think you can work with your basic vSphere deployment. I don't think you actually need like VCAC or any of that other stuff. So I'm going to kind of shift gears a bit and go from the nuts and bolts to what we're doing from a community standpoint. ManageIQ was they were a startup. They started in 2006. We acquired them in late 2012, early 2013. We always had the intent of taking their software and releasing it as open source. It was an interesting process, to say the least, to take something that was developed always in a proprietary way and have it developed in an open source way. Specifically because, there are certain things that you do when you're developing proprietary software that you don't really think about when you're developing, in an open source way. So, for example, there were lots of proprietary third-party libraries that we had to rip out and replace. There were these customized Ruby gems that they forked and then carried forward over time, which then diverged significantly from their upstream counterparts. That all had to be rewritten. I think we've finally gotten to the point where those have all been resolved. Those differences have been resolved. So now we're using upstream Ruby gems with our ManageIQ appliances. But why did we open source it? There are a couple of basic reasons. Number one, Red Hat has made a reputation out of open sourcing all of our things. And we have educated our customers very well on how we open source things and why we do that. And if we were to have a product that wasn't open source, it would kind of look weird to our customers, especially since we've spent the last 15 years telling them how great open source is. But more than that, there's also an issue of, right now, there really is no large incumbent in the hybrid cloud management space. There's certainly not an incumbent open source hybrid cloud management tool or toolkit. And so we see an opportunity to release this open source management toolkit, let people use it and create a large user base of people who can do real work with an open source tool and create right applications that are hybrid cloud applications that work across multiple platforms, and we see an opportunity. ManageIQ is the upstream project and community, and based on that we create a CloudForms product, which is the thing that we sell. When we create open source projects at Red Hat, we really don't like to use the open core model. When you look at this is an example of what not to do. This is where open core is where you write software, you put it in an open source license, you toss it over the wall, and then you rub your hands together and say, well, if you want the really cool stuff, you'll have to pay us to get it. And it can be useful in some circumstances, but it's pretty much a self-limiting thing. It prevents the open source community from ever really taking root or growing to any appreciable size or attracting a large enough audience of developers and users. So we try to avoid this model. There are lots of people who do use this model. I don't have any moral judgments about them, but it's not the preferred model that I like. So what we do like to do is we like to have the open source community be the place where the innovation happens, where people have the freedom to fail, and you can try many things, and maybe they don't work, and that's fine. It's still a learning process that we can utilize towards creating a better end result. So in this model, the open source community has its own identity. It's owned by everyone, and everyone is participating. And then we can create downstream from that commercial products. What are you doing, Ross? So what have we done with ManageIQ to date? We announced that we were open sourcing it last May at the OpenStack Summit in Atlanta. And then we did actually release the source code last June. And as of last June, we had publicly available pull requests, GitHub issues, we had a discussion board and all the source code available to test. We had community builds for the appliances so that you could download and try it or use it, and it was a fully fledged thing. We also went to market with 9 different partners at the time. Probably the most prominent of those is Booz Allen Hamilton, because they're the ones who are actually creating software today based on ManageIQ. They're probably our largest contributor at the moment, and we're looking forward to build on that. We had our first release last August. It's called Anand. We're naming our releases after chess grandmasters and chess world champions. So Anand is named after Anand Vishwanathan, and he's a chess stud, I guess. And the next release cycle is coming up, probably finishing up in late March, early April, It's the Botvinnik release, named after a Soviet chess world champion from the 50s. But when we look at the Managed IQ community, it's not just for users, it's not just for developers. We want both contributors on the development space, but we also want it to be useful for people to just download and run with it. We really want to service both of those. You'll see some communities that really choose one or the other. We really feel that both are essential to the success of the project. And when you think about it, you know, in my view of the world, users are essential to the success of anything. But in this case, it's really about building momentum, adding more resources. We've gone from small stage startup to now acquired by Red Hat, so we have more resources. And then with the addition of more community members, more participants, we'll have the network effect of people working together to produce a larger thing. Because the point is, when you look at all the different things that need to be managed in any kind of hybrid cloud environment, it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. There are a lot of differences between virtualization platforms and cloud platforms that are difficult to navigate. It's hard to have an accurate, say, projection of utilization of resources. It's hard to integrate completely with your financial systems. And so we're looking at working with different partners and individuals to fill those gaps and to create something that's larger than the sum of its parts. So roadmap. What are we doing now? What are we going to be doing? Like I said, we had our first release last September. One of the features was that it added support for Hyper-V via the Microsoft System Center Virtual Machine Manager. There was also a comprehensive rewrite of the API. We went to a RESTful API. We used to have this beautiful, comprehensive SOAP API, and we decided to go in a different direction for obvious reasons. There's also a lot removal of proprietary bits, like I told you. Again, it took about a year to really go from where they were with a proprietary appliance to the release of Anand, where it was clean, had none of the third-party proprietary bits were there anymore. A lot of parts were rewritten, and they had to be, and so it works better. Also, we did a lot of work to make sure that you didn't have to have such a customized build environment just to pull the thing down from source and make it go. That actually took a lot more work than I had anticipated. I have to say that the whole process of going from closed to open was very enlightening in many ways. You learn a lot about the mindset of engineers when they're in a project where they know no one's looking over their shoulder, versus in an open environment where everyone is always looking over their shoulder and they have to deal with those pesky users who demand things work. You can always look at what we're doing in any given time for sprints. Our sprints last 3 weeks. At the end of those 3 weeks, we'll have a sprint report. We just had one this past Wednesday. These are public. Anyone can participate. So you can hear from all the developers about the things that they worked on, the different pull requests they issued, the features they added. It's a really good way to come up to speed on the project and see what people are working on. The emphasis for this particular release cycle is there's the orchestration bit around heat integration, CloudFormation's integration. We're adding more to the RESTful API so we're on feature parity with the former SOAP API. And we're also investing significantly in the provider architecture. You'll notice in a previous diagram where I had matching providers to the services that you want to enable. Previously, writing a new provider or adding a new provider was a very manual and intensive process. And so we're looking to make that more pluggable so that anyone who is a provider, a cloud provider, can add their bits into a Managed IQ dashboard, hopefully fairly trivially. Right now we're enabling that via tighter Foreman integration, and we're hoping that you can utilize not just Foreman, but also Chef and Puppet and the other configuration management tools for the same purpose. We had our first design summit last October. We had over 70 people from 17 companies and 7 countries and 3 different continents converge on Malwad, New Jersey for 2 days of talks about Managed IQ. And I can tell you that firsthand that there is really no reason to go to Mahwah, New Jersey. It was not a destination event, let me put it that way. But it was, it was a lot of enthusiasm. People really enjoyed learning more. The videos from that are online on our YouTube channel. If you want to learn more in depth about specific pieces of what I talked about, that's a great place to go to learn that. Our NASCAR slide. And that's what I have for you today. Any questions? Oh, come on. Yeah.
So Managed IQ is like a solution for replacing SCaLE, for example?
So SCaLE is a cloud broker. It's all about provisioning and deployment. It's not about the total management process. So you could use, theoretically, SCaLE with like a Managed IQ backend. But yeah, there's some functionality that overlaps, but that's why we like to say we're not just a cloud broker. It's all about the comprehensive management piece and lifecycle. Yeah.
How many VMs do you think you need to get to that moment where you're like, oh, this is really useful?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, we have customers with a few thousand. We have some with a couple hundred. But generally speaking, it is on that scale. If you're a guy in a lab and you got 10 VMs you manage, you're probably not going to see the value. So, anything else? All right, yeah.
What's the typical duration to get something up and running aside from downloading the thing and installing it to different markets? There's a lot of integration.
If you have a running, say, vSphere cluster that's already up and running, once you provide the credentials and it does the discovery bit via VM fleecing, you can have something up and running relatively soon, like in a matter of a couple of minutes, while it takes time to crunch the information, add it to the VMDB. The question then becomes, great, you can see the things. Now, how can you actually start to automate the bits? That requires a bit more, in-depth knowledge and working with the tool on a daily basis to start iterating on different things that you want to do. If you want to get to the point where you're adding custom dialogues, that I would recommend, training to get to that point. But it's like everything else. There is a learning curve. It is a complex piece of software. I'm not going to lie, but you can at least get the first part, pretty soon, pretty quickly. All right, I think I need to make way for the next speaker. Without further ado, thank you so much. I appreciate it.